For our next stop, we're going to be going for a hike at Copper Falls State Park, and there are some amazing rocks of the Mid-Continent Rift from 1.1 billion years old, and there's some amazing waterfalls to boot. So let's start by taking a look at some wonderfully geologically themed trail signs along the way. Okay, welcome to stop number 2. We're at Copper Falls outside of Mellon, Wisconsin, State Park. And it's a series of waterfalls along the Bad River and the Tyler Forks rivers. Beautiful waterfalls, and the rock that we are looking at here is basalt. The basalt here is erupted as part of the Mid-Continent Rift system dating to 1.1 billion years old. So our first two stops, stop number 1 was the Archean age Puritan batholith. Stop number 2 is the 1.1 Neoproterozoic Mid-Continent Rift rock. So these are sort of bookending our stops. So the igneous rocks of the Archean are the oldest of anything we're going to be seeing, and those are sort of the platform on everything that everything else was going to be happening upon. And these Mid-Continent Rift rocks are the youngest. And we will be thinking about and looking at ways that these rocks have impacted all of those other rocks that happened in between those ages, which are the primary focus of our field trip. Okay, so 1.1 billion year old igneous rocks, part of the Mid-Continent Rift system. Talk about this at our next little mini stop on this hike through the Copper Falls State Park. But you should be thinking about what are the tectonic regimes that would lead to finding basaltic rocks hanging out right in the middle of a continent. Right? Okay, we've continued our hike at Copper Falls. We're a bit downstream, and we're now looking across at something called Devil's Gate. And you see that this ground is kind of this point here, and it continues across the little canyon of the stream. And if you look at the rocks on the other side, you might notice, if you look at these, you should notice that these are vertically oriented. The rocks across the stream here are actually conglomerate. So these are some of the sedimentary rocks associated with the infilling of the rift. So as the rift opened, you can imagine many sediments, sort of crumbling and cracking and falling down into this newly created rift valley. This is not unlike the East African rift in modern times. It's a good analog for the ancient Mid-Continent rift. Okay, but one of the things that's important here is you notice again that these rocks are vertically oriented, and the sedimentary rocks, such as this conglomerate, as well as the basaltic lava flows here, all would have been originally placed horizontally. It makes sense, right? Sedimentary rocks, lava flows, these things should all be horizontal. So the question becomes is how exactly did these rocks come to be vertical? Well, the best hypothesis and the best explanation for how these came to be vertical is that it's actually associated with the closing of the rift. So as this rift at 1.1 billion years ago started to spread out, nearly creating an ocean in the middle of what is today the middle of North America, would have split apart, say, Wisconsin from Minnesota. But that rift obviously failed. We don't have an ocean here in the middle of our continent. And just as it's about to succeed, at about that time, what is today Europe and Asia slammed into the eastern coast of what is today North America, creating the first round of mountain building of the of the Appalachian Mountains, and that orogeny, the slamming in of Europe and Africa into the east coast of North America, building the Appalachian Mountains for the first time, that is believed to have pushed closed this mid-continent rift. So that is the reason that the mid-continent rift failed. Sort of an interesting story about, relating to tectonics from a bit east of here. All right. But what's interesting and important to note, and the reason that I'm spending so much time here talking about these vertical rocks, okay? So let's just think about that. These rocks are vertical. These rocks are also the youngest rocks of anything we've seen here. And what that tells us is that whatever force tilted these rocks up onto their side to being nearly vertical, steeply dipping, would have done the same thing to all of the other rocks that are around here, right? So if you move these youngest rocks into this vertical position, well, the older rocks would also have been tilted similarly, okay? So that's an important thing to bear in mind, because as you're going to see on the rest of our stops, most of the rocks in this region are indeed steeply dipping, all right? So that's something that's very important to bear in mind, all right? So the two important impacts that these mid-continent rift rocks would have had on the Proterozoic sedimentary rocks that we're going to be focusing on this trip is, one, it's telling us a story about how they've been tilted up on their side. The other part is we're going to be thinking about how these lava and these magma rocks cutting through, and what are the impacts that those might have had as they burned, if you will, those existing sedimentary rocks, okay? So the purpose of this field trip is not primarily to be thinking about this mid-continent rift, but we can't ignore the mid-continent rift if our goal is to understand what's going on with the Proterozoic sedimentary rocks that we're focusing on for this trip. So here it is, Devil's Gate, beautiful downstream of the Bad River, all right? Vertical rocks.